Civilizations do not emerge in vacuum, they dictate the epoch together. For 700 years, two of the world's most formidable empires looked at the exact same stars. Welcome to Purvavrittam. We suffer from a chronological myopia, viewing ancient empires as isolated islands. But rewind to the period between 2600 and 1900 BCE. The early dynastic and Akkadian periods of Sumer were not just existing, they were actively overlapping with the zenith of mature Harappan civilization. This was a vibrant, interconnected Bronze Age hegemony. While a Harappan merchant in Mohenjo-Daro sealed his mercantile goods with a steady emblem, a Sumerian scribe in the city of Ur was actively dragging a stylus through the wet clay. They were not strangers, they were formidable trading partners. They shared an epoch, they shared a mercantile ocean, but history has severely fractured how we remember their dialogue. One civilization wrote their legacy in clay, the other looked at their secrets in stone. The Mesopotamian texts explicitly mention a distant, wealthy land called Meluha, which most scholars indisputably identify with the Indus region. By 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad was boasting of ships arriving from Meluha, laden with exotic carnelian beads, ivory, shell, and timber. We have absolute textual evidence from Mesopotamia proving they knew the Harappans, but here lies the greatest epistemological tragedy of antiquity. Mesopotamia left us thousands of readable clay tablets detailing everything from epic poetry to grain taxes. The Harappans left us thousands of seals, inscribed with a script we remain utterly incapable of deciphering, yet. They were logged in a monumental civilization conversation, but today we are only permitted to hear the one side of the echo. What if their silence was not an absence of literature, but a rejection of the medium? The oldest hard drive in human history was not constructed from silicon, stone, or clay. It was forged within the human brain. When we look at the Rigveda, we are not looking at mere book. The Rigveda is an encyclopedic corpus containing roughly 10,552 mantras, intricately arranged into 1,028 hymns. For multiple centuries before it was ever reduced to a physical manuscript, it was transmitted entirely through oral tradition. This is not the casual memorization of folklore. This was a rigorous, institutionalized phenomenon where the primary storage medium for an entire civilization's worldview was the neurological architecture of the human mind. They didn't build libraries that could burn, they engineered a living, breathing archive that walked the earth. Many ancient empires whispered their stories to the wind, but only one demanded that the wind remember every single syllable. We often romanticize the oral traditions of the world, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. They were transmitted orally, but they suffered from vast editorial changes and variations over time. The Zoroastrian Avesta shares profound linguistic parallels with Vedic Sanskrit. Yet much of it succumbed to the ravages of time and was lost in time. The Rigveda stands as an unparalleled anomaly in human history. It possesses a combination of sheer length, absolute phonetic precision, and rigorous cross-checking methods that no other ancient civilization can rival. It isn't just a testament to human memory, it is the gold standard of civilization preservation. They didn't just teach poetry, they engineered an impenetrable linguistic fortress. How do you guarantee a text survives for millennia without a single corruption? You design a human error correcting algorithm. Vedic students were not merely reciting sentences, they utilized multiple mathematically rigorous recitation grids. They employed the Samhita Patha for continuous flow, the Pada Patha to isolate every single word, and then complex interlaced cryptographic patterns like the Krama, Jata, and Ghana Patha. If a single priest made a phonetic error in one sentence, the redundant backup methods instantly exposed the flaw. They transformed the human mind into a distributed network rendering accidental corrupt on statistically impossible. The Harappans standardized the physical earth, the Vedic steers standardized the architecture of sound. Look at the fundamental obsession of the Indus Valley civilization, uncompromising standardization. They demanded standardized brick dimensions, standardized mercantile weights, and standardized seals. Now observe the later Vedic tradition. They didn't just memorize words, they mandated standardized pronunciation, strict pedagogical transmission, and precise pitch accents like the udatta, the raised pitch, anudatta, the lower pitch, and swarita, falling pitch. These are two distinct historical epochs, yet both exhibit an identical, terrifying observation with absolute structural precision. Civilizations do not rewrite their DNA without a cataclysm. Around 2200 BCE, the Bronze Age was brought to its knees by a 4.2 kilo-year climatic event. This was an era of severe prolonged climatic stress. It triggered the irreversible decline of the mighty Akkadian Empire, choked Mesopotamian agriculture, and forced catastrophic environmental transformations upon the Indus civilization. By 2100 BCE, Harappan cities were irrevocably transforming, the massive urban centers were shrinking, and the grand interconnected trade networks were bleeding out. The physical world was fracturing, and in face of annihilation, a civilization must either adapt its survival mechanism or perish entirely. A river that vanished from the physical earth, it flows eternally within the phonetic verses. The Nadi Stuti Sukta in the 10th mandal of the Rigveda meticulously lists the rivers from east to west. It elevates the Saraswati to unparalleled supremacy, praising it as the best of mothers, best of rivers, best of goddess. Yet exhaustive geological and paleoclimatic studies confirm the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, widely identified with the Saraswati. It underwent massive devastating changes over thousands of years. If the Rigveda was composed much later, why dedicate absolute reverence to a desiccated paleochannel? Because the Rigveda is not subsequent intervention, it is meticulously preserved paleoclimatic ledger of a geography that was actively dying. What if Rigveda is not the dawn of a new civilization, but the desperate, brilliant backup of a collapsing empire? Imagine the psychological terror of the Harappan elite around 2000 BCE. The rivers are shifting, trade is deteriorating, they realize a profound, terrifying truth: stone crumbles and cities disappear. If they entrust their legacy to physical bricks, they will be erased by the shifting earth. So they pivot. Instead of preserving their urban infrastructure, they decide to preserve their profound knowledge. They make the deliberate monumental choice that the civilization must become portable. They abandon the fragility of the metropolis for the immortal, unassailable sovereignty of the human memory. It was just a collection of hymns. It was humanity's first lossless compression algorithm. If a civilization is dying, how do you save its essence? You compress it. The Rigveda was not just poetry. It was a highly compressed data set containing their astronomy, their seasonal cycles, their geography, their social memory, and their ritualistic identity. They encoded this massive civilizational worldview into hymns because rhythmic phonetic verses are mathematically easier to memorize than sprawling prose. They did not write a book. They encrypted an entire epoch so it could survive the impending dark age. They witnessed the vulnerability of physical empires, so they built a citadel of sound. Suppose Harappan scholars understood that floods drown cities and fires consume libraries, but no climatic catastrophe can eradicate knowledge. If it is distributed across thousands of highly trained minds, so they decentralized the archive. They dismantled the concept of a singular vulnerable library and created 10,000 living libraries. The Harappan elite transitioned from being merchants of goods to becoming teachers of memory. Yesterday, they built cities of brick. Today, they built empires of memory. How do you stop human ego from rewriting history? You declare the history divine. If you hand an ancient text to a student and tell them it is important, eventually human arrogance will edit it. How do you prevent corruption? You deploy the concept of Shruti, that which is heard. Early Upanishads explicitly compared the Vedas to the breath of the Supreme Being. You instruct the students that these sounds are eternal, completely untouched by human intellect. You declare it alaukika, not of human origin. So they make it apaurusheya, the one which cannot be changed. It was not merely a theological decree, it was an impenetrable socio-linguistic firewall designed to paralyze the human instinct of altering the code. It wasn't designed for silent contemplation, it was an authoritative weapon engineered to command the cosmos. Before it was romanticized as profound philosophy, what was the Rigveda actually used for in antiquity? It was a fierce ritual liturgy. The earliest documented evidence shows it was wielded by the Hotra priests during the Soma Yagna. Its verses were deployed during the Rajasuya to ceremonially consecrate grains and legitimize their imperial sovereignty. It was chanted during the Ashwamedha to affirm absolute political authority across the realm. It wasn't a passive scripture, it was the active, resounding pulse of an ancient political and spiritual supremacy. It does not demand modern validation. Its supremacy was acknowledged before the birth of empires. Look at the earliest historical records, the Buddhist Pali canon, dating back to the 5th century BCE, frequently mentions the three Vedas, treating them as an already ancient and prestigious establishment. Early Jain literature acknowledges this entrenched Vedic authority. The great grammarian Panini treated Vedic Sanskrit as an ancient, fixed linguistic standard, completely distinct from this contemporary spoken language. By the time of Ashoka's Mauryan Empire, the practitioners of this oral tradition were a formidable, recognized pillar of the society. It wasn't just a sudden cultural emergence, it was the unyielding bedrock upon which subsequent empires were forced to build. We have spent a century searching for the Harappans in the dust. Perhaps we have been searching in the wrong place. We look at the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira and Lothal, lamenting the collapse of a grand civilization. We assume their legacy was buried beneath the shifting sands of the Indus Valley. But what if the greatest architectural marvel was never made of stone? What if their defining monument was a phonetic tradition, carried from one human mind to another, unbroken and uncorrupted, for thousands of years? The true legacy of antiquity is not buried in the earth. It is spoken aloud every single day. To connect the dots and detect the context, subscribe to Purva Vritam.